fans, we are so back. The most famous racing team in the history of motorsport, the team that invented what it means to be dramatic, the team that made losing an art form so beautiful that people fly from 6 continents just to watch them do it in person, and the team where if the car isn't on fire, then the fans definitely are. And every single season, without fail, the question comes up, can Ferrari actually win this year? And every single season, without fail, Ferrari find a brand new, creative, heartbreaking way to remind you that wanting something very badly and actually achieving it are two completely different things. But here we are, 2026, 4 races in, brand new regulations across the entire sport, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, the answer to that question is not immediately and obviously no. There is a real argument to be made that Ferrari might genuinely have a shot at this thing, and I want to go through every single reason why that's true and every single reason why you should still be terrified. 2026 has been a complete reset of everything. The whole point of a regulation change this big is that everyone starts from Lance Stroll's level. Nobody has an advantage, and the team that figures out the new formula fastest wins. And Ferrari, who had spent the entire 2025 season finishing 4th in the Constructors' Championship while driving what Lewis Hamilton publicly described as the worst car he had experienced in his entire career, bet everything on this reset being their moment. They sacrificed 2025 almost entirely to pour resources into the SF26. And when Leclerc topped the timesheets in pre-season testing in Bahrain and Hamilton started finding his rhythm in the car, Ferrari fans allowed themselves something they hadn't felt in a very long time, which is cautious optimism, which for Ferrari fans is basically the same emotional state as full panic, just with slightly better posture. Then the season started in Australia at Albert Park, and from the very first corner of the very first lap of this brand new era, Ferrari announced themselves in a way that nobody had seen from Maranello in years, because Charles Leclerc started 4th on the grid, saw a gap opening into turn 1, and drove at it like a man who had been kept waiting for far too long and was done being patient about it. He immediately seized the lead of the race. Lewis Hamilton carved his way from the 7th up to 3rd in the opening seconds, and for a brief glorious stretch, it was 2 red cars at the front of Formula One's brand new era, with the rest of the field scrambling behind them. Ferrari's last race win before this moment was Carlos Sainz in Mexico City in October 2024. Sainz, who no longer even drives for the team, so you can imagine what it felt like for the Tifosi watching at whatever ungodly hour Australia demands to suddenly see 2 Ferraris running 1st and 3rd like it was 2019 again. And then the race played out and Ferrari reminded everyone exactly who they are. Because when Isaac Hadjar's Red Bull broke down and triggered a virtual safety car on lap 11, Mercedes coolly pitted both their cars under caution, and Ferrari, in a moment that felt ripped directly from the Ferrari paint archive that every supporter keeps locked somewhere in the back of their brain, looked at the free pit stop and decided they had a better idea and stayed out. Russell and Antonelli got clean tires and track position, Ferrari pitted later and came back in 3rd and 4th. And that was essentially the race done, with Mercedes taking a 1-2 and Ferrari going home with a 3rd and 4th, and a strategy decision that was going to haunt their engineers for the entire month of March. Leclerc was gracious about it afterwards and said Mercedes were just extremely strong, but what he didn't say, and everyone in the paddock understood, was that Ferrari had the pace to make that race much closer and gave it away themselves with a single call from the pit wall. Which is, of course, completely unprecedented behavior from this team, and something that has absolutely never happened before in the entire history of the Scuderia. But here's the thing that actually matters, and this is where 2026 Ferrari feels different from recent versions of this team, because they didn't spiral after Australia, and they didn't have a press conference where someone blamed the tires or the weather or some vague aerodynamic phenomenon. They looked at what happened, accepted that they were behind Mercedes on pure engine power, but genuinely competitive everywhere else, and went to Shanghai for the Chinese Grand Prix with a clear head and a fast car. And that's where things started getting really interesting for the red cars. In the sprint race on Saturday, Leclerc finished 2nd and Hamilton finished 3rd, a Ferrari 1-2 on the podium behind Russell, and then in Sunday's Grand Prix qualifying, Hamilton actually out-qualified Leclerc, which was its own kind of headline because in 2025, Leclerc had been consistently destroying Hamilton on Saturdays to the point where serious conversations were happening about whether Lewis still had the 1-lap pace for this level of competition, and 2026 Hamilton looks like a completely different human being to the one who qualified last in Las Vegas and called it the worst season of his career. When the race started on Sunday, Lewis did exactly what Lewis does, launching off the line from 3rd, going around the outside at turn 1, and briefly leading the Chinese Grand Prix in a Ferrari. And if you told anyone watching Hamilton's 2025 season that 12 months months later, he'd been leading a race in a red car, they would have asked you to put the drink down. Antonelli reclaimed the lead before the end of lap 2 and was never seriously threatened again. But what followed was genuinely one of the best Ferrari storylines in recent memory, because Hamilton and Leclerc spent the closing stages of the race going absolutely wheel to wheel against each other for the final podium position. Side by side through corners, blocking and overtaking and responding, the kind of proper hard racing that teammates rarely give each other, and Hamilton eventually came out on top and stood on the podium at the same circuit where he'd score his only result of any note in 2025. Emotional, and looking like a man who had been through 12 months of genuine misery and was finally on the other side of it. Then came Japan to Suzuka, and Ferrari went there and did something they had barely managed to do at any point in the previous season, which was be consistently, undeniably, measurably fast across an entire race weekend at one of the most demanding circuits in the calendar. Leclerc qualified 4th, made another stunning start, and was right in the mix at the front with Piastri and Russell through the middle portion of the race. And then in the closing stages, after the chaos of the Bearman safety car reshuffled everyone, Leclerc pulled off an overtake on Russell around the outside of turn 1 at Suzuka. Around the outside of turn 1 at Suzuka. Which is the kind of move you only attempt when your car genuinely gives you the confidence and isn't an Aston Martin tractor. He took 3rd, added more points, and after 3 races, Charles Leclerc sits 3rd in the Drivers' Championship with 49 points, just 23 behind Antonelli and 13 behind Russell, with Hamilton right behind him in 4th with 41, and Ferrari sitting on 90 constructors' points to Mercedes 135, which is a gap but is absolutely not a disaster and is not the kind of gap that closes the conversation. However, Miami GP was the perfect summary of Ferrari's 2026 season so far. All the ingredients for a great result, none of the payoff. They arrived with their first proper aero upgrade package of the season, looked genuinely quick all weekend, and Leclerc actually led the race after capitalizing on the chaos at turn 1. The dream was alive. And then, as in tradition, it wasn't. He fought his way back up to 3rd after his pit stop, but Piastri was closing in the final laps, and in trying to defend, he pushed too hard, spun at turn 3, hit the barriers, and somehow still made it to the flag, only for the stewards to hand him a 20-second penalty for corner cutting that dropped him to 8th. The man who led the race sat in 8th. Hamilton's afternoon was a different kind of painful. He picked up floor and side pod damage from contact with Colapinto on the very first lap and spent the next 50-something laps nursing a broken car around Miami like a man trying to carry a sofa up a flight of stairs, eventually finishing 6th. Leclerc's own summary was about as brutal as it gets. Fast enough to lead, not fast enough to keep it. Ferrari brought upgrades to Miami, showed real pace, and left with a 6th and an 8th. Somewhere in Maranello, a very expensive espresso machine is taking the blame for this. But regardless, Ferrari are still 2nd place in team standings, and we need to talk about everyone else on the grid because a huge part of why this Ferrari title conversation is even happening is not just that Ferrari are good, it's that several of the teams who were supposed to be ahead of them are either in complete chaos or still figuring out which way is up. Start with McLaren, the team that won the 2025 Constructors title and sent Lando Norris to his first Drivers' Championship, who came into 2026 as genuine favorites, and after 4 races have managed to score 94 Constructors points because both of their cars suffered electrical failures before the Chinese Grand Prix even started. Piastri missed Australia after crashing on a sighting lap before the formation lap, and Norris hasn't completed a full Grand Prix start since the 2025 finale. The reigning world champion sitting in a garage in Shanghai watching the field go racing without him is not the image McLaren had in mind when they were celebrating last November, and Ferrari were beating the reigning champions by 44 Constructors points after 3 weekends, which is a sentence that would have sounded completely absurd 6 months ago. And then there is Red Bull, who deserves their own separate therapy session, but we'll do our best to cover it here because Verstappen, the man who won 4 consecutive championships and dominated modern Formula 1 so completely that people were genuinely comparing him to Michael Schumacher, is currently fighting Pierre Gasly and Fernando Alonso for points in the midfield, while his car either breaks down, refuses to start, or handles so inconsistently that both he and his teammate Isak Hadjar have described going from one extreme to another between corners on the same lap without even changing anything on the setup. And Hadjar summarized the whole situation with devastatingly honesty when he said last year's car was hard to drive but fast, and this year's car is hard to drive and slow, which is genuinely the most concise description of a team's collapse that I've heard in years.
When they go low, I go lower.
Verstappen himself has started openly questioning whether he wants to continue in Formula 1 at all, calling the regulations anti-racing and Formula E on steroids. And while some of that is frustration talking, the fact remains that the 4-time world champion, who is supposed to be Ferrari's biggest obstacle between them and a championship, is currently 13th in the standings and threatening to leave the sport, which from Ferrari's perspective is about as good as news gets without anyone actually giving them anything directly. So the picture right now is Mercedes clearly ahead on engine power, Ferrari genuinely competitive on pace and racecraft and sitting comfortably in second in both championships, McLaren slowly learning how to optimize the Mercedes power until they're running but still clearly not there yet, and Red Bull in what can only be described as a full institutional identity crisis with no obvious timeline for recovery. This is the most open championship picture Ferrari have faced since 2012, and the season is only 4 races old, which brings us to the thing that could genuinely change the entire trajectory of this title fight, and it has an acronym that is about to become one of the most important words in Formula 1 this year, ADUO, which stands for Additional Development and Upgrade Opportunities. The way it works is straightforward enough. The FIA monitors every engine manufacturer's power output against a benchmark across the opening races, and if a manufacturer is confirmed to be running a deficit of 2% or more to the leading power unit, then they qualify for a mid-season engine upgrade that wouldn't normally be permitted under frozen development rules, because the whole point of a system is to prevent one manufacturer from running away with a new engine formula and making this whole championship irrelevant by round 5. Ferrari have been confirmed to be running approximately 25 horsepower behind the Mercedes power unit, which clears the ADUO threshold comfortably, and the FIA has already granted Ferrari the green light to introduce an upgraded power unit, with that upgrade expected to arrive at the Canadian Grand Prix or possibly Barcelona if they want one more race to validate the specifications before deploying it in a points-paying context. And the fact that Toto Wolff immediately started lobbying the FIA to ensure that engine upgrades don't interfere with the competitive pecking order the moment ADUO approval was confirmed tells you everything you need to know about how seriously Mercedes are taking this threat, because Toto Wolff does not start political campaigns against things he isn't worried about. So when you add it all up, a car that is already second fastest on the grid, 2 drivers who are both performing at close to their genuine ceiling, a free mid-season engine upgrade coming that could close 25 horsepower to Mercedes, the reigning champion struggling with reliability, and Red Bull essentially removing themselves from the conversation, this is genuinely the best position Ferrari have been in a championship since the Vettel years, and even Leclerc himself, who is not exactly known for wild public optimism, given that his default post-race expression looks like a man who had just been handed an unexpected bill, came out and said that this year could be the one, that the SF26 is simply a strong car, that he genuinely enjoys driving it, and that the pace is there, and it now comes down to executing and not dropping the ball, which compared to 2025 when he was spending entire post-race press conferences explaining why a car that should have been in the top 3 was finishing in the top 6 on a good day, represents a completely different level of confidence in what's underneath him. But now we get to the part of the video where I have to be honest with you, because this is Ferrari, and Ferrari's history is not just a history of great racing and passionate fans and beautiful red cars and the most recognizable brand in motorsport, it's a history of almost, a history of right there in the bag, completely under control, and then gone, vanished, lost in a way that nobody anticipated through some new and creative mechanism of self-destruction that the team somehow manages to find no matter the era or the regulations or the lineup. And if you think 2026 is going to be different just because the car is quick and the drivers are motivated and an engine upgrade is incoming, then you need to take a walk through the archive, because this team has been here before and they know exactly how to make it hurt. 2008. Felipe Massa at Interlagos, the final race of the season, leading the championship going in, crossing the finish line in first place, celebrating, the garage going absolutely wild, already champions in their own mind. And then Lewis Hamilton overtook Timo Glock in the very last corner of the very last lap and won the driver's title by a single point. And Massa had been world champion for literally 30 seconds before it was taken away from him in the funniest fashion the sport has ever produced. Ferrari fans of a certain age still physically cannot watch a replay of that race without their blood pressure doing something concerning. 2010, Fernando Alonso at Abu Dhabi, one of the greatest drivers alive, in a Ferrari that was good but not dominant, and Ferrari's strategy team made the decision to keep him behind a Renault driven by Vitaly Petrov, a man whose entire Formula 1 career most people have now completely forgotten, for the entire race. Unable to pass, watching Sebastian Vettel win the championship in a Red Bull, while Alonso sat in traffic that his own team had put him in through a strategic call that defied explanation at the time and has not improved with age. 2012, Alonso again, dragging a Ferrari that was probably the 4th fastest car on the grid to within 3 points of the world championship purely through driving brilliance and force of will, running out of road at the very last race because the tractor underneath him simply couldn't do what he needed it to do in the moment that mattered most. 2017 and 2018 with Vettel. Genuinely competitive seasons, real championship leads at various points, and then a broken front wing in Singapore that handed Hamilton a title that had looked genuinely uncertain, and a spin from the lead in wet conditions in Germany 2018 that effectively ended any realistic hope of stopping Mercedes that year. And then 2025, which wasn't even a near miss, wasn't close, wasn't heartbreaking in the traditional Ferrari sense, because heartbreak requires proximity, and 2025 Ferrari were never close to anything to have their heart broken by it. Hamilton finished the year without a single podium in what he called the worst season of his career. Leclerc finished 5th in the standings after squeezing 7 podiums out of a car that had no business producing 7 podiums, and the team finished 4th in the constructors while McLaren lifted the trophy and Red Bull celebrated a driver's title for Verstappen. Ferrari sacrificed an entire season for 2026. They bet everything on the reset. But Mercedes are still winning every single race. Antonelli leads the championship. The engine gap is real, even if an upgrade is coming. And Ferrari have 2 championship-hungry drivers in the same garage who already have shown a willingness to race each other as hard as they race anyone else on the grid, which is wonderful for entertainment and potentially catastrophic for points if it happens at the wrong moment of the season. So yes, Ferrari can win in 2026, and I mean that sincerely. The car is real, the drivers are exceptional, the opportunity is genuine, and this is the most credible title challenge the red cars have mounted in years. But this is also Ferrari. You keep believing in them because the talent is real and the beautiful moments are worth something, but you've also learned. You've learned not to get ahead of yourself. So enjoy what's happening right now. Enjoy the fast Fridays and the podiums and Leclerc's overtakes and Hamilton looking like himself again in a Ferrari, because those things are genuinely worth enjoying. But get ready for an "it's so over" moment, because 19 races is a long way to go, and this is Ferrari. And Ferrari always find a way to remind you exactly what you signed up for.